Building a multi-tenant SaaS app on Azure, 7 key decisions. Hey, welcome. In this video, we're breaking down building a multi-tenant SaaS app on Azure, 7 key decisions. Let's get into it. Now, next up, Decision 1, choose your tenancy model. Before writing a single line of code, answer one question: how isolated do your tenants need to be? Azure's multi-tenancy architecture documentation identifies 3 main models. For most startups with fewer than 50 tenants, the hybrid model is the right starting point. Fully isolated from day one costs 3 to 5 times more in infrastructure. Fully pooled can make enterprise sales harder, because a CFO at a 500-person company will ask who else is on that database, and expect a specific, satisfying answer. Now, next up, Decision 2, multi-tenant data isolation strategies on Azure. Data isolation is the hardest part of building a multi-tenant SaaS app on Azure. Pick the wrong model and you'll either risk data leakage between tenants or pay far more than necessary for storage and compute. There are 3 realistic options with Azure SQL. Option 1, shared database, shared schema with row-level security. Every tenant's data lives in the same tables, filtered by a foreign key. Azure SQL supports row-level security natively, enforcing isolation at the database engine level. Even if your application code forgets to filter by tenant, the database will not return rows belonging to another tenant. For most SMB SaaS apps, this is the right default. Next up, Decision 3, select the right compute layer for your Azure SaaS app. 3 services dominate this decision: Azure App Service, Azure Container Apps, and Azure Kubernetes Service. The right answer depends less on technical preference and more on team size and operational budget. Azure App Service is the fastest path to production and the right choice for most SMB SaaS apps under 200 tenants. You get autoscaling, deployment slots for zero downtime deployments, managed TLS, and built-in application insights integration. The main constraint is flexibility. Custom networking, sidecar containers, and fine-grained per-tenant scaling policies require either premium tiers or a different service. Azure Container Apps is Microsoft's answer to "I want containers without Kubernetes complexity." As of 2026, it's mature enough to build a production SaaS product on. You get Kata-based autoscaling, built-in Dapper support for service-to-service communication, and straightforward environment-based tenant routing. For a startup building their first SaaS product, Container Apps usually hits the right balance of control and simplicity. Let's talk about now, Decision 4, authentication and identity in multi-tenant Azure apps. Authentication in a multi-tenant Azure app has 2 distinct problems that most tutorials conflate: how users log in, and how your app resolves which tenant they belong to at runtime. For user-facing SaaS apps, Azure Entra External ID is the standard recommendation. It handles registration, login, MFA, social identity providers, and custom branding per tenant. The practical advantage over building your own auth stack is that it manages password reset flows, account lockout policies, brute force protection, and compliance with authentication security standards. None of that code is yours to maintain. Tenant resolution is a separate question. The 3 common patterns are: Now, Decision 5, automate tenant onboarding from the start. Manual tenant onboarding is a time bomb. At 5 tenants, creating a database, configuring DNS, and setting up a user flow by hand takes 20 minutes and feels fine. At 50 tenants, you're spending 15 to 20 hours per month on provisioning tasks. At 200 tenants, it's consuming a meaningful portion of a developer's week, every week. Treat tenant onboarding as a first-class API from day one. When a new customer signs up, a provisioning service should handle the full sequence automatically. Azure Logic Apps handles orchestration of this sequence well, with built-in retry logic, error handling, and HTTP trigger support. For more complex provisioning flows that need custom compensation logic, Azure Durable Functions gives you explicit state management that Logic Apps can't match. Let's talk about Decision 6, control costs before they control you. Azure multi-tenant costs grow in ways that routinely surprise teams coming from single-tenant apps. You're paying for shared infrastructure but need per-tenant cost visibility to know whether your pricing model actually works. A few specific traps to avoid. Egress costs. Data leaving Azure is not free. If tenants regularly download large reports, data exports, or media files, egress fees accumulate fast. Use Azure CDN for static assets and design large file workflows to stay within Azure's internal network where possible. Let's talk about Decision 7, Observability in a multi-tenant Azure environment. Standard monitoring does not work well for multi-tenant apps. If you see a spike in error rates across 100 tenants, you need to know immediately whether it's hitting one tenant or all tenants. These two situations require completely different responses, and the difference is only visible if you've built tenant context into your observability layer from the beginning. Build tenant context into every log, trace, and metric from day one. Azure Monitor and Application Insights support all of this once you instrument your request pipeline to carry tenant context through async operations, background jobs, and service-to-service calls. Context propagation in async code is the tricky part. From the originating HTTP request needs to flow correctly into background jobs that run minutes or hours later via service bus or a durable function. Let's talk about conclusion. Building a multi-tenant SaaS app on Azure is not about finding a perfect architecture. It's about making good decisions in the right order and leaving room to adapt as you learn from real customers. The tenancy model sets your cost structure. Data isolation determines your compliance posture. Compute determines your operational burden. Authentication determines how well you can sell into enterprise accounts. Start simpler than you think you need to. Azure App Service with row-level security in a shared database has launched dozens of successful SaaS products. Elastic pools and container apps are upgrades you can make once paying customers tell you what they actually need, not guesses you make before you have any tenants. If you want a technical review of your SaaS architecture before committing to a direction, our team works with SMBs and startups on Azure on exactly these decisions. Getting this right in the first 3 months saves 6 months of refactoring later.